Okay, so again, what I wanted to do is just sort of define some terms here, and hopefully this will help people kind of get a sense when they look at a particular company, the bigger sort of picture that it sits within. And so one of the things there's you could use the word method or you could use process, but a word that's kind of stuck in CDR is pathways, right? So these are these kind of distinct different ways in which we take carbon out of the air, but also store it. It has to be both of those things to truly be carbon removal. If you're taking carbon out of the air and then it's going back up into the air, that's not really a removal, right? And one of the beautiful things about carbon removal that we talk about frequently is that there are just so many different ways that this can be done that are just have nothing to do with each other in terms of the underlying science and engineering, what it's like to be around one of them. And that is what allows us, if you add all those things together, that gives us really a hope of reaching these billions of ton targets that we need to, over the next decade. So I'm going to use that word pathway, just stick with that for it. Now, the ones that there's many different ways of doing it. The ones that I'm listing right here, which I'll name and get into in a little bit of detail. These are the pathways that have a company that corresponds to them within our supplier list on the website. So if you go to that, our webpage, and you scroll down, you'll see those suppliers, and it says what kind of pathway it is, right? So, and you can kind of group them together in different ways, where they have certain similarities and some are very, very dissimilar. But the ones I want to go over are biochar, BECS, which stands for bioenergy and carbon capture and storage, biomass burial, which has many different forms, even represented in our supplier list, direct air capture or DAC, enhanced rock weathering, sometimes just called enhanced weathering or ERW, and then ocean alkalinity enhancement or OAE, right? So I'm just using BECS, DAC, ERW, OAE. I'm going to go with those acronyms. Maybe I'll go back and forth, but if you spend any time in CDR, it's rare that you'll hear somebody utter the whole phrase bioenergy, carbon capture and storage. BECS is the term, same with DAC, ERW, and OAE. Now, as I showed here, underneath these categories, you can see the companies that are represented. Some have a single one, some have two. Biomass burial has 4. And you might say, well, why so much of that? And you'll see as I describe it, they're so different from each other, but categorically they do fit underneath the biomass burial rubric. Now, some of the things which I'll tease out a little bit when I talk about specific examples, but they can be grouped together where some of them overlap on the removal side, that they're using the same kind of basic underlying mechanism to work, where when it comes to storage, some of them might be grouped together. But to just show, like, for instance, how we group these together, biochar, biomass burial, and BECS, they all, when it comes to the removal, how do you take the carbon down? These are all driven by photosynthesis. They're using what naturally already occurs, where plants are going through the photosynthetic process, they're drawing carbon down and fixing it in organic matter, right? So that's the driver, and that's already happening, and we're just kind of hooking ourselves to that. But when it comes to the storage side, we have to sort of disrupt what normally happens when you have biomaterial gets drawn down, it dies, and then it gets re-released again. So what these methods are doing, they're coming up with a sort of a technological approach or an intervention that uses what's naturally happening, but then stops it from going back up, right? When it comes to ERW and ocean alkalinity enhancement, which I'll describe in a second, one takes place on land, one takes place on ocean. These are different. These are mineralization processes that kind of accelerate the natural process whereby certain minerals that have a high alkalinity in terms of their chemistry, in a very slow process normally, they'll interact with water and carbon in the air, and they'll turn into a mineral or a carbonate or a bicarbonate, and they'll fix it. So these are very different in operations in the real world in terms of where they occur, but they have a very similar type of removal process, and they turn it again into a solid mineral that will stay that way for tens of thousands of years. And then direct air capture, it's hard to come up with the term for this, but chemisorption. It's a chemical process. You're building these machines, and they chemically, and there's so much diversity among direct air capture. It's not one thing. It's like dozens of things. But they're chemically absorbing carbon from the atmosphere with machines, right? But when you look at the storage part, the other part of the coin, you start to get different kinds of pairings, actually. And the way I think about it, when you take things like biomass burial or biochar, the actual thing that is created when carbon is removed photosynthetically, it embodies that carbon, and it stays that way with biochar and biomass burial, but with some modification. So we call that embodied storage. So the very thing that is the destination of the carbon for when it's removed, in this case plant matter, with some methodological tweaks, it stays embodied in that thing for a longer time than it normally would. With ERW and ocean alkalinity enhancement, as I just said, you're taking that carbon and it's going through a process of mineralization, which is also, a chemical reaction where it turns from gas into a solid mineral. And then with BECCS and DAC, as I'll illustrate a little bit at a high level, here you're taking the carbon out of something, but then you got to do something with it actively. It doesn't happen by itself. And this is usually where geological sequestration, you're taking that carbon and you're putting it underground in an aquifer or in a geological formation where it will stay. Or in some cases, you're putting it in products like concrete, which Carl and I are always talking about. And there's other examples of that as well. So this is just to show you that the two pieces of what we're trying to achieve, the removal and the storage, there's a great number of diversity that is represented just within our supplier portfolio. So, and guys, stop me at any time you want to add anything or have a question about anything. Like literally just say something and I'll stop. So it's just the three of us on screen here. But just to give you a high level of this, what it is, biochar is probably the most well-known form of carbon removal, even if people don't know or associate it as a form of carbon removal. And the reason why that is that for centuries, starting in the Amazon, we don't even exactly know how long. There's archaeological record that shows it going back at least 600 years. But this was originally used as a way to enrich soil and make soil more productive. So you had indigenous farmers at that time. They discovered somehow through their own genius that if you take different kind of vegetable or plant waste matter and you heat it up with low oxygen, it creates almost like a charcoal type of material that you can then crush up. And when you apply to soil, they discovered it makes it more productive. It makes it retain more water. And so that's why it's been around for a really long time as an agricultural amendment. What we've discovered more recently is when you turn it into that material, it's keeping that embodied carbon, it's fixing it. And so that when you apply it to soil, it's going to stay in that form for equally, there's debate about how long, but minimum 100 years. Some people think it's up to 5,000 years if you look at the core of the biochar, right? And biochar is really interesting, and it's right now, I think about 80 to 90% of all the carbon removal sales or tons that have been delivered are biochar. And there's a reason for that. It's because there's many different ways that you can make it. You can make it from all kinds of materials, from some of the most abundant, globally distributed, important staple crops like rice husks are great for it, coffee husks, all kinds of woody biomass waste. And then the bottom one, that's the prettiest picture I could find of it, but biosolid sludge, things that are actually in waste treatment plants. Anything that's organic matter that's taking carbon down, you can pyrolyze it in different degrees. That's the name of the process, and turn it into biochar. And the other thing that makes it so prolific is that it can be done at a variety of scales. Here again, it reminds you kind of solar, where I used to work in rural India and Afghanistan and Africa, where you'd have this one little solar panel that would give somebody light, and then you compare that to this giant industrial scale, utility scale solar thing that's sitting in the middle of China or Arizona. There's a variety of ways in which it can happen with different levels of sophistication. That bottom picture is actually an open air project called the Naka Valley Biochar Project, where they make biochar in these kind of small kilns in a refugee camp, but you can compare that to things that are much more sophisticated, but because it can be done at multiple levels, that can allow it to expand in many different places. And then the other thing is that it's most well known for its agricultural usage, as I said, but it turns out there's just a bunch of things you can use carbon or biochar for. You can use it as a material that you substitute cement for, or as an aggregate in concrete. It could be used to help remediate brownfields because it absorbs, all kinds of different, nasty metals and things like that. It could be used for water filtration. So you have like a lot of ways you can make it, a lot of ways you can make it, a lot of things you can use it for. Explains why it's such a prolific form of carbon removal. And within our portfolio, we have just one biochar company based in Houston, Texas, that is already operating called Applied Carbon, and they're focused on Texas, big ag state, as well as other southern states and Oklahoma. And their value add is they have this integrated system where they collect the feedstock, they put it in the back, they pyrolyze it as they're going, and then it can either be applied depending on the season. So they've taken all the phases of it and they put it into one machine. So that's, you can find out more about it on our website. So let me pause there for a second, guys. Let me know if you have any questions or comments before I move on to the next one.
No, but I'm loving that you're highlighting biochar because that's my personal favorite.
It's so on my mind because I'm working so much now in Brazil that I gave a little bit more description of that, at least in terms of my slides, that I will with the subsequent ones. But and I'm just listing these in alphabetical order, not by preference. Now, BECCS is another one that has been talked about and modeled. It's often a technology along with direct air capture that the IPCC, when it does its report, it uses as its sort of baseline assumption technology. And this could not be more different in some ways than things like biochar in terms of its operation. And what this is where, again, plant matter, anything that involves plant matter, photosynthetically, it's drawn down the carbon. And so what they do is with BECCS is that can you take that material and actually combust it either to make heat or electricity in a plant at a variety of scales. This shows one in Sweden. It's done by Stockholm Exergi that creates both electricity and heat for district heating where it's located. But instead of letting that CO2 go back up into the smokestack and back out into the air, which would be a carbon neutral application, they capture it and then it will be sequestered. So in a place like Sweden, which is now, there's all this infrastructure being built out for geological sequestration in the North Sea, that is feasible, but you can do it in a variety of different ways, actually. And here's just a little, just sort of generic diagram that explains again how it works. Again, you're working on whatever took the carbon out is already naturally occurring, and then you're again incinerating that, capturing it, and putting it underground. And we have one company, which if you look at their summary is very cool. They're based in Southern California near LA, called Arbor, which was founded actually by a bunch of people that were rocket scientists. And they figured out this incredibly efficient way to actually do the BECCS process and the conversion process that's also very modular. So it doesn't need to be done just on a giant scale. It could be done in a variety of different scales. So very, very cool company that's making some great strides. And again, there's really good materials as well as a link to their website that you can see. Biomass burial. This is one of the most, sometimes when you explain to people, it just sounds so simple in some ways that people are like, huh, you can do that. And this actually, there's a lot of things that fall underneath the umbrella of this that are quite different. But in general, what it means is saying, okay, well, rather than letting that biomaterial decompose and send the CO2 as well as methane back into the air, what if we just kind of locked it underground in different forms? And we put it under conditions that we could monitor, and the conditions we put it under mean that, like a form of waste, I almost said this out of my mouth. It's not like nuclear waste, but a similar kind of problem that you put it in a vault that you've tested and it's going to stay there for decades, centuries, and even millennia. And there's many different ways of doing that are represented in our portfolio of suppliers. One is BioOil, which is extremely cool, which is pioneered by Charm Industrial. This is a San Francisco-based company, but it has its operations in the Midwest where there's lots of ag waste. So it's active in Oklahoma right now. It's got a big office in Colorado. And what they've done is they've taken corn stover, which is an abundant form of waste. They can do it with other stuff too. And they create a type of oil from it that is very, very carbon dense. And this is one of the coolest things about it. They talk about it, and there's an article that we link on the website from the New Yorker. It's almost like reverse mining or reverse oil drilling, that they're taking this material, they're turning it into an oil, and then they're injecting it into a retired infrastructure, like retired wells, and they can put it into a variety of different types of of mines, salt mines, retired salt mines that are already at the end of their life. And when it gets down to a certain depth, it's this sort of viscous material that then solidifies like a glue. and it stays there and it doesn't break down. Woody biomass burial is what Carbon Lockdown is doing. And this is a company that's spun out of the University of Maryland. And the scientist there who's part of, he's listed, you can see, read his bio on our webpage. He was kind of the guy who first kind of really started thinking about this as an academic at the University of Maryland close to 20 years ago. He started writing about it. And like so many CDR companies, it's a scientist said, I can't write any more papers about it. We got to do this. And he built a business around it with other people that had business backgrounds. And this is even much simpler, where you take biomass, in this case, woody biomass, which is very stable, that has died in various different forest environments, and also could be a form of a liability for forest fires and things like that. And you design an underground vault that you then take this and you literally just bury it, and you cover it and you wrap it, and then you put soil back on top of it, and then you monitor it in terms of what the release of carbon or what the breakdown is with some machines. And then you can just do other stuff on top of it. You wouldn't even know it was there after a certain point. So in some ways, sorry, my son is here. Hey, buddy, I'm on a call. It's very, very simple, but very, you can see how this could be replicated. And one of the things that's very cool about this model too, it can be highly localized, where you might have a partner like a Carbon Lockdown that has the monitoring, reporting, and verification, can do sort of project development, but you could work with a local partner that could do the local labor on it. The people that know how to retrieve and thin forests and things like that. So it can be highly, highly distributed, and is quite low tech in its execution. On the other side of that, you have a company like Vaulted Deep, which is based in Houston, and they've been around for a long time. I can't remember. It says it on the website, might have been close to 20 years. And they were doing waste management. I love how these come out of different places. And what they do is they take other forms of organic matter that's more sort of industrially processed. So biosolids from wastewater treatment, large organic waste streams from food. And they, similarly like Charm, are able to bury it in these engineered vaults that go down deep and lock it away and monitor it. So it's a bit more capital intensive, but it uses other kinds of streams that we have to manage as well. And then carbon casting, which has some of the best videos if you look on our site. This is really interesting. I almost went through when I was driving back from Texas. I just ran out of time through their facility. But they take a variety of different wood waste and other forms of waste, and they carbon cast it. They make these kinds of bricks that they then wrap up, and they put in these sort of engineered vaults, almost like Fort Knox. So it's a bit more carbon, but they have incredible monitoring ability. And right now they're doing this in Arkansas, and they're based in Nashville. So this just gives you, under that one thing, there's similar principle. Hey, buddy, what's up? Sorry. I'm in his room. Then, no problem. And then you see how it can be articulated in many, many different ways. All right. Direct air capture is one that probably has the most amount of buzz and the most coverage. It's a purely carbon removal technology. This is how I fell in love with carbon removal almost 20 years ago, and I've been tracking it and then finally made the jump in. And this is direct air capture. And these are purpose-built machines that chemically absorb CO2. Air flows through them that contacts with a contactor, and then it absorbs the carbon into a sorbent. And then either through heating or through changes in moisture or through pressure or through electricity, there's a variety of different species, it can re-release that CO2 in a pure capturable type of way, which can then be stored underground, or again, it can be utilized in products. And now there's close to 200 direct air captures and dozens of different ways of doing it, that some are gigantic systems, some are even small enough to fit into the basement of a building. So it's a highly diversified technology category. The one that we have represented here as a supplier is Avnos, which is a really cool company that's based in Southern California, but most of their operations and their first plant is actually in New Jersey. And we had them on This is CDR, our webinar about a month ago. And what's cool about them, it's all electricity, so it could be easily plug in with renewable energy sources. And then it also, in addition to removing carbon, it generates, for every unit of carbon it takes down, it's like 5 times of water creation. So it can be potentially integrated with different water utilities and infrastructure. So that's a very cool feature of it. Really awesome company. And then the last two I'll say, which are actually quite similar, but they in terms of what's happening from a science perspective, one, enhanced rock weathering, or ERW. And this is, again, what I described before, is that you take these abundant, there's many ones like basalt and olivine and serpentine and wollastonite, these types of minerals that are out there in the world. Many of them are already mined. And then you grind it up, and through exposure to air and under conditions with water and heat, it mineralizes, it creates a bicarbonate. And like biochar, this is something that actually originated, was first observed because of its benefits for agriculture, is that when you put an alkaline substance in a powder like this as an amendment in agriculture, it reduces the acidity of the soil. And this can actually increase the resilience of the productivity of soil. So you had farmers in Brazil and in Canada and Japan and in Europe for decades, going back to the mid-19th century, were doing this as rock dust. And more recently, we said, wow, well, what's really happening there is it's creating this carbonate, which ultimately will go into rivers and and then ultimately out into the ocean and stay as a carbonate for tens of thousands of years. But you can also do this in more controlled environments like crew carbon. So Ion is one company in our portfolio of suppliers that's doing this ag-based method. They already have projects that they're doing down in Mississippi and in the South. But then crew carbon does this in a really cool way, where there is this alkaline material that is in wastewater. And what they've done is they've developed a machine that you pass that alkaline material through an actual contained unit to create the carbonation of it. And it allows you to sort of monitor it in a much more interesting way. And there's a really cool little video that's linked that explains how that works on the website. So these are two very different instances of a very similar thing, one out in farms, one in urban wastewater treatment plants. And then lastly, I'll mention ocean alkaline enhancement, which is very similar, but rather than starting that process on soils, you're doing it directly in oceans. And there's many different companies that do that. And it's extremely cool because it also at scale could potentially reduce the acidification of ocean water, which is a whole other problem that obviously is threatening biodiversity in the oceans. And this similarly can be integrated with other forms of infrastructure like ports and with wastewater treatment facilities as well. And the one company that falls into that category, it's not advancing, sorry. Well, I don't know why it's not showing that slide, is Vicarb, which I can almost see their offices from where I am. They're based in Brooklyn at the Navy Yard. And that is what they're doing a version, and they already have a trial right here at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. So anyway, that might have gone longer than I expected, but I wanted to give, was that helpful, guys? I wanted you guys to stomp me on my foot virtually if I get too in the weeds there, but let me know if that's a helpful setting.
I always learn new things from you, Chris, every single time. So
total tour de force, Chris.
All right, great. And I hope my grunting didn't slow me down too much there. But what I would say is just with that, you look at the website right now. Again, I'll be adding Vault and Deep right now. It's a little labor intensive to get those up, but that's almost launched. You can look more about the page has who the founders were, where do they come from? It gives a little list of what are their milestones so far, where have they done projects, who have they sold carbon removal tons to. We have a list of recent things within the last year of media coverage, and then videos and pictures of things that they've done as well. So my hope is that gives people a basis for looking across these for comparisons. And if not enough, they can reach out to us, jump on here and say, I'm trying to figure out what this actually means. They could join us on a Thursday and we can give them a little bit more guidance. So that brings us right to the hour. I'm going to kind of cut that video that I did and put it up on the website with a little bit of cleaning. And hopefully that'll be a useful resource to people. And then next week, we'll get into the decision-making process. But I like it when we start like we did with this, Harold and Carl, maybe have a few other people, where we brainstorm a little bit more about, this is what I think I'm going to do for my campaign, or this is another idea, maybe bring a few more people on. And as the weeks go, we can kind of check back with people about like, have they made any progress on it, but I'll get into the sort of, how do you decide? What criteria might you apply based on where you are will be the focus of next week's workshop, at least for the second half.
Hey, that's great, Chris. If you are going to work on a brief, I got 12 places to take it to tomorrow.
Love it.
In Marin.
Great. Yeah. I'm looking for you, Carl, on the Marin side. And let me know too, Carl. I know there's, Harold, but the Rotary Club thing is this just so enticing because it maps on so well to these civic groups that are locally based.
Yep.
They're increasingly focused on climate. So we got to figure out a way to kind of get, a Rotary Club involved. So if that's one that you have maybe at arm's length, let's keep exploring that. Maybe we could talk about it a little bit next week.
Carl, do you remember the name of the CCL couple who's deep into Rotary National or International?
Is it the Osbornes, maybe? Tom and Ginger? I don't know.
No, I'll try and dig them up. But anyway, yeah, they're plugged in with National.
I really need to jet, guys.
Yeah, I got to jump too.
Thanks, Chris.
This has been fantastic.
See you next week. Bye.
All right.